Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, Forrest over here and welcome back to another reading live stream. Tonight, we finally finish the story of Five Nights at Freddy's. It has been it's taken a bit longer than it really should have for me to have read this book, but we are here nonetheless. So, as of this point right now, we've seen that Abby is being taken to the pizzeria by this Golden Freddy animatronic, and Mike is looking to go there to rescue her, pretty much. Now Abby, understandably so at her age, doesn't know what's really going on, but it's going to be an interesting situation here, to say the least. It's going to be a very fun finale, to say the least. Hello, Izumi. How you doing here? How you doing tonight? So, we're going to be reading the rest of the chapters plus the epilogue for this story, and I'm not going to end the stream until we finish the story. So, without further ado, let's officially begin the book, the reading finale of Five Nights at Freddy's, the movie novelization. Fix this. There we go. Chapter 21. Mike opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was an orb of bright, bright light above his head. The light was too bright to be Freddy's. Or was it? The next thing Mike noticed was that he was lying on metal. Metal? Not that chair again. Mike put his hands on the cold, flat surface and tried to push himself off of it. That was when he noticed the third thing. His whole body hurt. Why did... He levered up enough to look down at himself. He frowned at what he saw. Mike wasn't in the chair at Freddy's. He was lying on a stainless steel table. His shirt was gone, and his chest was wrapped in a swath of heavy bandages. Beyond his chest, Mike could see that his pants leg had been cut away from his left lower leg. The leg was wrapped up in bandages, too. He gritted his teeth and sat up. He swung his legs off the metal table. "Careful," a woman's voice said. No, not just a woman. Vanessa. Mike tracked the direction of the voice, and he found Vanessa, uniformed, sitting in a folding metal chair about 6 feet from him. The chair was tucked in the corner of a room filled with white metal and glass-fronted cabinets. Definitely not Freddy's. The room's walls were painted stark white, and the floor was gleaming royal blue. Everything Mike saw looked fresh and sanitary. "I got the bleeding to stop, but you'll probably need stitches," Vanessa said. Mike looked at his bandages again. "Where are we?" "Police Supply Outpost and Aid Station. I brought you here from Freddy's. You were badly hurt." A memory of the descending open mask flashed through Mike's head. "They tried to kill me." Mike looked at Vanessa. She dropped her head and her eyes got tucked into a pleat of darkness cast by the cabinet next to her. "But I guess you already knew that," Mike said. Vanessa said nothing. "Oh, good to see you're in good spirits, Izumi, and hello, Daniel Barry. How you doing tonight?" Vanessa said nothing. Mike leaned forward. "Max, her brother, and the other men. Did you know about them too?" Vanessa lifted her head and her eyes came out of the shadow. She looked at Mike and he saw that her eyes were filled with tears. "You did know," Mike said. He really hoped that she didn't. "It's complicated," Vanessa said. "Complicated? You mean more complicated than a bunch of possessed robots murdering innocent people? Those people trashed Freddy's, Vanessa shouted. They weren't innocent. Well, Abby is, Mike said. As Vanessa buried her face in her hands, Mike didn't bother to say that even vandals didn't deserve to have their faces gnawed off or their bodies chewed in half. Why Max? Mike thought. Why had she been part of that? He shook his head. It didn't matter. Abby was the only thing that mattered. You watched her play with those things, Mike said to Vanessa's bowed head. His voice rose. You knew what they were capable of, and you didn't say anything. Mike shoved himself off the table. He took a weak step forward. He scanned the room. Where are my things? I need to go. Now! Vanessa dropped her hands. When she looked up at Mike, her face was striped by glistening tear track, was striped by glistening tear tracks. Mike, Abby's in danger! Mike spotted a shirt lying on a stainless steel counter under a row of cabinets on the far side of the room. The shirt was bloody and it was torn, but it was a shirt. He looked toward it. Mike! He stopped and turned toward Vanessa. Vanessa put up her hands. Slow down. Take a breath. She switched to her stern cop voice, and her face flipped from contrite to authoritarian. Tell me what happened. Mike suddenly couldn't move. The memory of his dream, of everything he'd done, came rushing back at him. It was his turn to drop his head. If only he could take it all back. It took superhuman effort to open his mouth and confess what he'd done. As he did, he couldn't face Vanessa. He talked to the floor. In my dream, Mike began. He took a breath and tried again. They wanted Abby, and I gave her to them. He pressed his palm against the side of his head. It was a terrible mistake. And when I tried to fix it, he pounded the heel of his hand against his temple. Mike looked at Vanessa. What do they want with my sister? Several long seconds passed. Mike thought Vanessa wasn't going to answer. And when she did, he wished she hadn't. They want to make her like them. They want to make her like them, Vanessa said. The pretty yellow taxi drove away. Abby waved to the driver, but he didn't wave back. He didn't even look at her. Abby shrugged. She gazed up at Golden Freddy, her friend. Golden Freddy held out his big furry hand. Abby grinned and took it. They swung their hands together as they walked toward the entrance to Freddy's. Golden Freddy's heavy steps thumped over the crumbling concrete sidewalk. Abby felt like she might burst. She was so excited. Golden Freddy pushed the metal door open. He let go of Abby's hand and motioned for her to go through in front of her. Such a gentleman. Abby skipped into the pizzeria's lobby. Behind her, the heavy door clanged shut. Abby turned back toward Golden Freddy and he was gone. Abby frowned. She turned in a full circle. Where'd you go? Abby looked at the door. Had he left? No, she'd have heard his footsteps. She turned toward the archway. She'd have heard his footsteps no matter which way he'd gone. Abby shrugged. She'd seen some of Golden Freddy's magic. He must have used that to disappear. Maybe he was with the others. Abby started across the lobby, heading toward the dining room. She couldn't wait to see Freddy. Original Freddy. And the others. The scuff tap of Abby's footsteps seemed to bounce off the dining room walls as she walked into the room. She looked toward the stages. The curtains were drawn back, but the stages were empty. Abby frowned and looked around. Hello? Most of the dining room was so dim that Abby could barely see it. Instead of the usual half on, half off fluorescent bulbs that lit the room, just one single floodlight came from the stage. It stretched out like a fat, yellow, ghostly finger, which pointed across the room at the wall of children's drawings. Freddy? Abby called. Chica? Anyone? Abby's call circled around the room and returned to her. No one answered them. Looking at the light finger, Abby gazed toward the end of it. Why was it pointed at the drawings? Curious, Abby walked over to the wall. She looked up. Abby had noticed the drawings before. It was impossible to miss them. The curled, brittle papers covered nearly one whole wall of the dining room, and the air currents in the room were always trickling with the drawings, which made them crackle. Abby had never really looked at the drawings before, though. Now she did. Drawn by kids younger than Abby, the pictures were mostly of stick figures, but it was possible to tell what the figures were supposed to be. Abby could see, in the images, kids playing, families eating, the animatronics performing. The pale circle of light at the end of the yellow ghost finger was centered in the middle of the drawings, and in the center of the circle, one drawing stood out. Abby stepped over to it. The drawing was of a yellow rabbit, which was holding hands with 5 smiling children. Even though they were clumsily drawn, Abby recognized the children. They were her friends. After she dropped her bomb, Vanessa had left her chair and started pacing back and forth by the cabinets. Mike, still stunned, could only watch her in silence. Vanessa stopped pacing. Standing with her back to Mike, she began to talk. Cop Vanessa was gone again. This was the gentler side of Vanessa, and she spoke so softly that he had to strain to hear her. In the 80s, she began. When those children went missing, the police searched Freddy's from top to bottom. Every square inch was accounted for, but they never found them. Something about Vanessa's voice or her words turned Mike's shame on its head. Anger swelled up from his bandaged chest. He clamped his teeth together and clenched his fists. The man who took them, Vanessa went on, he's a very bad man. A cruel man. Mike watched Vanessa reach into the pocket of her uniform pants. She took out a folded piece of paper. He's also a very clever man, she said. He knew the parents would scream bloody murder, and the police would come looking. And he knew there was one place that the police would never think to check. Because... why would they? Vanessa turned around to face Mike. Why would anyone? Mike's legs almost went out from under him as his mind replayed the gut-wrenching moment when he'd watched the animatronics open up in the torture chamber of the Parts and service room. His memory flashed on Max's cleaved-in-half body inside the animatronic. As if she was seeing what Mike was envisioning in his head, Vanessa said, "It's not just the children's ghosts inside those robots." Mike's stomach heaved. He kept his mouth shut. "It's their bodies," Vanessa said. The yellow light finger disappeared. That made it seem like a dark shade had come down over the drawings. The shade came down over everything, for an instant. Then four new light fingers extended down from the ceiling. They pointed at an angle toward the two stages. Abby turned around and looked toward the stage. She clapped her hands. There were her friends. Freddy and Bonnie and Chica stood at their microphones on the main stage. Foxy was set up on a smaller stage. They were all ready to put on a show. Vanessa took a few steps toward Mike. The folded paper was compressed in her closed hand, held to her chest. The hand was visibly trembling. You have to understand, Vanessa said. The kids don't want to hurt anybody. It's him. He influences them. Somehow. Who? It wasn't their fault. Vanessa's tone was pleading now. They were scared and alone and they didn't know any better. Vanessa held out her empty hand. You have to believe me. Why did Mike think that Vanessa wasn't talking just about the kids at Freddy's? He knew why. The urgency in Vanessa's tone was too intense. It sounded like she wasn't just trying to justify the behavior of some ghost kids. Her tone was too personal for that. It sounded like she was begging for absolution. Mike stepped forward and put his hands on Vanessa's shoulders. He could feel them quaking in his grasp. She's scared out of her mind, Mike thought. Abby frowned at her friends. Why weren't they moving? The animatronics were frozen in place. They looked like sculptures. Abby's gaze shifted from one lit up friend to the next. She took a step forward. Guys? They still didn't move. The Vanessa switch clicked again. The almost childlike, please forgive me, crimp between her brows disappeared. Her jaw took on the hardness Mike had seen so many times before. Vanessa shrugged out from under Mike's hands. She stepped back, and when she spoke again, her voice had an edge. I tried to warn you. Mike gave Vanessa a you've gotta be kidding look. She nodded once, emphatically. In my way, I really did try. You were just too dense, too single-minded, she shrugged. It's too late now. He knows you're looking for him. The resolve wavered. Little girl Vanessa reappeared, hunching Vanessa's shoulders. He'll be coming, she said in a hushed tone. Who is he? Mike asked. Vanessa pressed her lips together. Vanessa, please, Mike implored her. You have to tell me. Vanessa held out the folded paper she held in a vice grip. He is my father, she said. Mike took the paper. His hands beginning to shake, he unfolded it. The paper was an old folded and refolded photograph. Mike gasped. No, he whispered. He stared so hard at the photograph that his eyes started to hurt, and the photograph began to blur. But it didn't matter. He'd seen it. He'd never unsee it. In the photo, a little girl with streaked blonde hair stood in front of a bright and shiny Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. A screaming yellow grand opening banner fluttered from the eaves of the building. Beneath the banner, all four animatronics were crouched down on one knee, surrounding the little girl like they were all one big happy family. The girl grinned from ear to ear, and in her hand she held Garrett's orange toy airplane. He dropped the photo. He took a step back as if the photo was a firebomb that would incinerate him. Mike lifted his gaze to Vanessa. He had to clear his throat twice before he could get his vocal cords to work. When he could finally speak, his words sounded like they were rattling over a gravel road. You, you, knew. Vanessa held out a hand. Mike, my brother. This whole time, you knew. Vanessa shook her head. Not about Garrett. No. At least, not when I met you. But the others? Vanessa looked down. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so. The photo hadn't turned into a firestorm, but Mike's emotions did. All the shame, the confusion, the shock, they all fused together. They exploded into a ball of pure rage. Mike lunged forward and grabbed Vanessa by her uniform collar. Tell me how to stop them, he growled. Tell me how to save my sister. If ever Mike expected to see the cop side of Vanessa, it was now. But she didn't react with power. She shrank inward like a victim. Her eyes were so wide that they almost filled her face. Abby took a stutter step back when the stage speakers crackled. An assault of whiny feedback forced her to cover her ears. The multicolored performance lights sprang on, sweeping over the stage like whipping ribbons. Red ribbons, blue ribbons, yellow ribbons, orange ribbons, purple ribbons. Light ribbons light ribbons went every which way. And finally the animatronics came to life. They exploded to life. They all launched into the rock song that they were most famous for. Abby, relieved, clapped her hands and started to dance. Chapter 22. In the driver's seat of Vanessa's police cruiser, Mike curled his fingers around the car's thick, leather steering wheel and stomped on the accelerator as he rounded a curve and hit a straightaway on the back road that led from the aid station to Freddy's. The V8 engine rumbled and Mike felt the cruiser's power swell around him. He inhaled deeply, gathering his courage. The interior of the car smelled like Vanessa. If Mike closed his eyes, which he wasn't going to do going this fast, he could have convinced himself he was sitting in a field of flowers, under an apple tree, eating a vanilla cookie. If only. The night was pitch black, and the only light on the road was created by the searchlight beams of the cruiser's headlights. Surrounded by all the LED light equipment inside the car, Mike felt like he was in the cockpit of a spaceship, flying through the farthest reaches of the galaxy. It was too bad that all the bells and whistles that crowded the cruiser's dashboard and middle console were of no use to Mike. Too bad they weren't phasers or photon torpedoes. Or something. Unfortunately, the two-way radio, laptop, radar gun, electronic ticketing console, video camera, in-video router, and animatronic license plate reader were not going to help Mike save his sister. Electricity, Vanessa's voice said in Mike's head. With one eye on the spears of light drilling through the black tunnel of country road and forest and one eye on his memory, and Mike relived his preparations for returning to Freddy's. He'd been getting ready to leave the aid station. Bloody and shredded shirt back on, Mike clicked Vanessa's utility belt in place around his waist. The leader band was heavy because all of its compartments and sleeves were stuffed full, except for the gun holster, because Vanessa wouldn't let Mike have her gun. Mike settled the bed about as comfortably as he could on his hip, as Vanessa opened one of the tall supply cabinets and leaned into it. Electricity is the key. Vanessa's voice was muffled because her head was in the cabinet. Vanessa's head came out of the cabinet. She turned, holding up what looks like a long black and silver barbecue fork with a lightsaber-like handle. Vanessa pushed a button on the handle, and a blue sizzle of electricity sparked between the two prongs on the end of the fork. We use these cattle prods for animal control. She walked toward Mike and pointed at his waist. And you've got two taser guns on the utility belt. They won't do permanent damage, but they'll mess with the animatronic circuitry. Hopefully buy you some time. The cruiser's heavy-duty tires hit a pothole deep enough to jounce the vehicle. Mike shut off his mind's replay. He glanced at the cattle prod, which lay in the passenger's seat. Would it really help? Given everything Vanessa had hidden from Mike, could he trust her advice? Mike put his attention fully back on the road, and when he did, he spotted a faint red aura low in the distance, neon red, plus some yellow and white. Freddy's exterior lights were on. The bleary phosphor- phosphorescence, fluorescence, phosphorescence that reached out into the surrounding blackout looked to Mike like a dire omen. It pretty much screamed, abandon hope all ye who enter here." Cattle prod hanging from a loop on the utility belt. Mike gripped the tire iron he got from the cruiser's trunk after he'd parked the car at the edge of the pizzeria's disintegrating asphalt. He was skulking along the side of the grizzled old building, which struck him as a hostile enemy waiting for him, in stealth mode, eager for the coming battle. Bending low, Mike ran his hand along the rough, warped wood siding. You should avoid the main entrance. The memory of Vanessa guided him in his head. Look for an outlet vent on the east side of the building. It was sealed up years ago, but if you can get it open, that's the best way to get inside without being detected. Mike's palm transitioned from splintery boards to what felt like rusty metal. Bingo. Step 1. Find the vent opening. Done. Mike fumbled with the utility belt. He found the penlight's compartment and he pulled it out. Aiming the light briefly at the metal he'd found, he saw the three 2x4s had been nailed over the vent. Even in the on and off blip of penlight he shone on the boards, he could see that the lumber was gray with age. Shouldn't be a problem to remove. Mike dropped Mike dropped around on the utility belt and found the sleeve that held a folding knife. Flipping it open, he used the end of it to work the nails loose from the boards. The back and forth motion made a wheezy scratch, but it wasn't too loud. In just a few minutes, Mike had pried the boards away from the vent. After that, his knife made quick work of loosening the cover from the siding. Step 2. Remove vent opening. Done. Mike dropped to the ground and peered into the confined musk of the vent shaft. The penlight revealed a dusty mass of cobwebs just inside the opening. Mike sighed and swiped away at the webs. He eased into the passenger space and marked himself forward. As he slithered, his mind took him back to the aid station. He replayed his last few moments with Vanessa. When Vanessa had handed Mike the keys to her cruiser, their fingers had brushed together briefly. The effects of the touch lingered far after Vanessa drew her hand back. Troubled by the puzzle of his feelings for this woman who flipped so mercurially from friend or foe, Mike had lifted his gaze to her face. He'd found her looking directly at him. Of all the emotions Vanessa had triggered in Mike, the prominent one now was betrayal. Mike felt double-crossed, stabbed in the back. The throbbing pain of his wounds highlighted that sensation. Could she see the bitterness in his eyes? Mike didn't know, but he could easily read her feelings. Vanessa's face was contorted with humiliation and regret. For an instant, Mike had felt sorry for Vanessa, but then he thought about Garrett. "How many?" Mike asked. He clipped the words and swung them at her like he was hunting her with her own baton. Uh, Gonna drink real quick. Vanessa flinched and looked away. She avoided the question. You need to hurry. Mike dropped his voice into an aggressive snarl. How many, Vanessa? How many has your father killed? Vanessa's gaze flitted up to Mike's face and then away again. I don't know. Honestly, I don't. Is Garrett? Mike couldn't finish the question. He swallowed and tried again. Is my brother one of them? In the machines? Vanessa looked squarely at Mike and shook her head. No, Garrett was before Freddy. Was before Freddy's. Mike felt the flames of his fury settle by inches. It was small comfort, but at least his brother wasn't a ghost trapped in a robot. Mike collected himself. Garrett was gone, but he could save Abby. He had to get going. Come with me, he said to Vanessa. Vanessa shook her head vehemently. No. Mike leaned in toward her. You owe them, and you owe me. Vanessa's head shook even more emphatically, so much so that her hair twist came undone, and her hair fell down her back. I can't, Mike, she said. I can't. Obviously, seeing that her refusal was rekindling the fire of his anger, she rushed on. I really can't. If he is there, I won't be of any use to you. Believe me. Mike did. He looked into her eyes, so soft blue right now that it seemed like some of her essence, life force, was leeching from her. He saw it all clearly now. The reason for the way she acted, for the choices she'd made. Vanessa had lived through every worse trauma than Mike had. She was beyond screwed up by her childhood. She was broken. Mike's words came out thoughtlessly. He really messed you up, didn't he? Vanessa turned away. She was visibly quavering. Please. Her voice was soft but instant. You have to hurry. Mike fisted the cruiser's keys. He nodded. As Mike turned away from Vanessa, he saw her sink to the floor. Her sobs followed him out of the aid station. The replay in Mike's mind faded out as a rat scrambled past him. Mike's knee-jerk reaction to the rodent brought him to a dead stop, and he could have sworn he was hearing Vanessa's sobs more murmuring through the vent shaft. The pitiful sounds wrapped around him just as heavily as the thick, sticky clumps of cobwebs that clung to his hair, clothes, and skin. Mike wanted to cover his ears to block out the sound, but he knew it came from within him. And besides, he needed his hands and arms to continue his furtive army crawl. Even over the memory of Vanessa's sobs, Mike could hear the sound of 80s music. He'd heard it faintly when he was just a few feet inside the building, and it got louder and louder as he progressed through the shaft. The driving rock beat muffled the imaginary sounds of Vanessa's pain, and they brought Mike fully into the present. Mike inched his way around a turn in the shaft, and he saw a flare of painted light reaching out toward him through the darkness. He was almost to the living room. Mike picked up his pace. This creature created more noise, but the booming music masked the tiny banging of his knees against the metal ductwork. In just seconds, Mike Payton reached the metal gate that covered the end of the vent shaft. Through the slanted slates, he could see, minimally, into the distance room and the stage at the opposite end. Mike turned his head so he could push his face up against the slats. He put his hand toward he put his eye toward one of the openings. He choked on one of his breathing tablets. Hey, wait, hey, hey, Mike whispered urgently. Abby was flushed and sweaty from dancing to the music. Her friend's act was amazing. All the time they'd been performing, Abby's friends had seen her lost in the music. Now, though, Chica looked down at Abby and motioned for Abby to come up on the stage. Yay! Abby thought. She hopped up onto the stage and ran to her friend. Abby expected her to be included in the performance, but instead, Chica took her hand and pulled her back, away from the microphones. While the others continued to dance and sing, Chica led Abby back to the back of the stage. Abby was confused, but she didn't resist. Why should she? Why should she? Was her best friend. Chica was her best friend. Abby went along wondering what Chica was up to as Chica opened the door and stepped into a hall. A really smelly one at that one that had almost no light. Chica started down the hill, pulling Abby along by her hand. Although his view was obstructed, Mike could see through a door at the back of the stage. Chica was leading Abby into a narrow corridor. Mike shoved at the metal grate. It didn't budge. Backtracking so he could throw one more power behind his efforts, Mike pounded on the vent covering. It continued to hold. Grabbing at his knee to get through the opening, Mike's hand groped Vanessa's utility belt. There was something he could use to loosen the vent cover. Abby trusted Chica, but the cramped hallway made her think of a cave, long cave, underground and cut off from the light. It made her a little nervous. Abby was not about to ask Chica where did she get this. Chica stopped, and let's go to Abbey Island. The what the hell did I get that from? I don't know. I'm gonna read it again. Abby was about to ask. Wait, I'm gonna read from the very beginning. Sorry, not the beginning of the chapter, just where I'm at here, the beginning of this next scene. Abby trusted Chica, but the cramped hallway made her think of a cave, a long cave, underground and cut off from light. It made her a little nervous. Abby was about to talk. Chica, er, Abby was about to ask Chica where they were going when Chica stopped and let go of Abby's hand. The chick stepped back, and Abby saw an open doorway. What, what's in there? What's in there? Abby asked. Chica raised a small handful and potions, points of, Chica raised a, wait, hold on a second. Abby was about to ask Chica where they were going to meet, when they were going, when Charlie stopped and let go of Abby's hand. The chick stepped back and saw an open doorway. What's in there? Abby asked. Chica raised a hand and pummeled a large feathery figure friend into the room. Still a little nervous, but the, but the, what's that? Still a little nervous but game, Abby shrugged and walked forward. She found herself in a room filled with tools and parts of robots. It's kind of icky looking. She didn't have seagull eyes. Just, I mean, she likes seeing all the unconnected hands and arms and legs. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Chica nudged Abby and pointed again. Abby turned, and she immediately began hugging herself. She didn't really like what she was looking at now, not even a little. Sitting in the kind of light Abby has seen as a con in town, on TV, a big red-haired doll in white sheets laid us in a metal chair. Abby didn't like either the doll. I didn't like either the doll, which had staring eyes and tattooed white smile, or the chair, which was ugly and hard-looking. Abby began backpedaling. She was not only just near nervous. She was a really bad kid. Like something was very, very wrong. She opened it might be time too. Awareness sound advice of purring the cat, but not as friendly, began coming from the doll. Abby struck a place by growing fear and the types of curiosity stared at the doll. Let's see here. Let's see. Let's go ahead and read the top of the page because I didn't see where I left. Where I ended off at. Abby didn't like either the doll, which had staring eyes and a too white smile, or the chair, which was ugly and hard looking. Abby began backpedaling. She was no longer just a little nervous. She was feeling really, really bad, like something very, very wrong. She thought it might be time to. A wound! Suddenly a purring cat, but not friendly, began amazing from the dog. Abby, stuck in place behind by growing fear and the tiniest bit of curiosity, stared at the doll. As Abby watched, the dolls don't become up, yeah, up the. As Abby watched, the doll also began to open. The dolls inside looked like they were filled with sharp metal. Always curious to step away and Abby's curiosity stepped away. Scarred as the chef thought, she briefly clicked another app. His curiosity, Abby's curiosity went away. Scared was the only thing left. She backed up another copy, or another step. Chica, I began. I don't like my assistant had been. When Mike finally got the great. Oh, there we go. When Mike finally got the grate loose with the help of a multi tool from Vanessa's duty belt, one punch sent the vent come flying. It cleared to the floor, but the noise was barely noticeable because the song video. What? The rock music was now playing. It caught to the floor, but the noise was barely noticeable because the rock music was now blaring even more loudly. Its volume was nearly at speaker exploding decibels. Mike crawled out of the vent onto the floor. There he lay still, looking toward the stage. Had the animatronic seen him come out of the vent opening? It didn't seem like it. Foxy was still dancing on a small stage, and Freddy and Bonnie were singing their lungs out, eyes closed, boogieing childishly. Figuring that if he stayed low, he could fly under the radar, Mike began crawling toward the main stage. As he went, he kept an eye on the mount animatronics, but they were still oblivious. They were like dervishes, lost in their performances. They moved with an almost maniacal intensity. When Mike reached the base of the stage, he raised his head. He needed to know that he needed to reach the doorway at the back of the stage, but Freddy and Bonnie blocked her way. How could you get past them? As hesitated, a distant and very long, loud clang clang click produced Mike out of the pocket pondering an action shot. He leaped into his feet and whirled around the woman. Yeah. He leaped to his feet and whirled toward the sound, which was coming from down the hall, not from the back of the stage. What if Chica had left Arby farther into the building in a roundabout way? Mia was no longer thinking down the animatronics. He was he was thinking about Abby. We had to go find her. He had to find her. Freddy's eyes opened. He stopped singing and dancing. He looked in Mike's direction. Mike immediately ducked low and below scrambled after just a couple of yards of retreat. His body was whacked against something as he felt a splash of character of water soak in his shot, shoe and sock. There you go. He turned. The buckets of soapy and now dirty water were still sitting at the base of the stage, right where Mike had left them. Mike glanced up at the stage. Freddy was back to performing again. Good. The buckets had triggered the idea for a plan, one that just might work. Alright. Chica, no! Abby screamed as Chica carried her toward the awful doll in the metal chair. Chica had Abby on by the torso, the head in front of Chica and legs behind. Grunting, Abby squirmed and twisted, but Chica's grip was strong. Chica flipped Abby over and began pushing her into the open doll. Abby, her heart going faster than it ever had, did everything she could do to stay away from the doll's scary metal parts. Abby kicked her legs like she was swimming. She threw out her feet to drive her shoe into Chica's hip. She balled her hands into fists and pounded on Chica's arms. Abby's hissy fit leg struggle slowed Chica down a little because Chica had to try to line Abby up with the doll and she couldn't because Abby kept moving. However, Chica wasn't slowed down enough. Abby knew why. She was just a little girl and Chica was big and made of metal. Abby couldn't get free. She found herself being pushed back onto the metal pan. Help! She shrieked. Abby really wanted her brother. She really, really did. Mm. Alright. Mike had gotten himself into a crouch next to one of the buckets when he heard Abby's cry. The sound moved him. Fast. Grabbing the bucket, Mike dashed toward the stage. He was fully visible to the stage now, but Freddy and Bonnie were too engrossed in their performance to notice. Mike pulled back the bucket and tossed its contents to the stage floor, right under Freddy's feet. Mike whirled and went for the second bucket. This one he threw toward Bonnie's feet. As soon as the second bucket was empty, Mike tossed it aside. He pulled out one of the taser guns from Vanessa's utility belts, and he planted himself in front of the stage. Mike fired the taser without hesitation. Instantly, the gun's wires shot metal probes up and out toward the pools of water beneath the animatronic's feet. An arc of blue electricity hit the water and coursed like a heat-seeking or robot-seeking missile into those feet. The electricity shot up through both animatronics. A pyrotechnic display of sparks fountained over the stage. Freddy and Bonnie stopped singing and dancing. They went stiff. The stage lights flickered, then went out. Both animatronics became felled redwoods. They hit the stage like they had been dropped from the top of a 50-foot building. Wham! The impact literally shook the building's foundation. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I need to mute this because I know it's gonna do something there. Okay, it muted it. Good. I do not want to get hit with that. I really don't want to get hit by something kind of stupid. Just wanted to make sure it's not playing no music because I know if it plays music, I'm screwed. While the floor beneath him was still pulsating, Mike turned. He ran toward the sound of his sister's screams for help. Abby was almost completely pressed into the doll now. Her neck and back and legs and arms all hurt from the hard, sharp metal poking skin. Panting and crying, Abby was becoming too weak to fight anymore. Oh, can't do that. Back it up. Her throat hurt from screaming and yelling, and now she was crying. Her nose was so stuffed up she was having trouble breathing. Trying to make sure my things close enough. Abby looked up at Chica. Abby had never been so hurt and let down. Not even Mike had ever made her feel this bad before. Sniffed. Chica, let me go. Chica didn't even look at Abby. The animatronic. She was sure Chica was about to close her into the doll. The haunted house light was gobbled up by bright white light. Abby squinted and tried to see Chica. Hey! Mike's voice shouted. Mike! Abby called out. I knew he'd come, she thought. Actually, Abby hadn't known Mike would come, but she'd hoped. And then her fear had made the hope go away. Now the hope was back. Mike, having flipped on the main lights in the parts and service rooms, stood in its doorway, his taser gun at the ready. Get the hell away from my sister! He yelled at the nasty yellow chick who was trying to shove Abby into the red-headed animatronic. Red-headed animatronic. That almost makes me think of, let's see, red-headed animatronic. What was that one character? Is this like that one character from Sister Location? Isn't that one character they referred that one animatronic from Sister Location, which was basically the leader of the group of animatronics over just like how Freddy's the leader of of these animatronics um outside of whoever is controlling them. Mike recognized the doll-like animatronic. It was the one he'd seen in the storage room. No way he was going to let Abby get closed up inside that killing machine. Chica turned away from the metal chair. Letting go of Abby, the robot chick came at Mike. Mike immediately triggered the taser gun. The taser wires streamed through the air. The probes separated, and each of them drilled directly into one of Chica's eyes. Chica dropped as fast and as hard as her compatriots had. She hit the floor in a full prone position, legs and arms akimbo, and she began to convulse. Her eyes blinked frenetically. The instant Chica let her go, Abby had shoved herself away from that little girl animatronic. Now she jumped out of the chair and ran to Mike. She threw herself at him. Mike caught his sister in his arms. He hugged her close as she sobbed against his neck. Are you okay? Mike asked. Are you hurt? Mike felt Abby's head shake against his shoulder. No, she said in a tiny voice. But she was crying. Her tears were hot on Mike's skin, trickling down into his shirt. Abby pulled her head away from Mike. She stole a glance back at Chica. Mike looked that way too. Smoke was spiraling up from Chica's charred eye sockets. The chick was dead still. Abby sniffled loudly and said, through more sobs, I don't know what's wrong with her. And I don't know why she's acting like this. Mike patted Abby's shoulder. I know. I know. It'll be okay. Keeping an eye on Chica, Mike set Abby on the floor, but he held on to her. When it was clear she was steady on her feet, he crouched down in front of her. Listen to me, Abs. Mike put his hands on Abby's shoulders. Abby pulled her gaze from Chica and looked into Mike's eyes. He looked right back and he leaned closer to her. I've been an idiot, Mike said, about so many things. I need you to know that I'm sorry, okay? Everything I've been hung up on, none of it matters. You're the most important thing in my life. And I swear to you, I'm going to make sure you know that. I'm going to show you, every day, how much you matter. I'm going to do everything better. Abby's brows furrowed briefly, and she swiped at her tear-covered face and gave Mike the biggest smile he'd ever gotten from her. Mike felt like his heart was blowing up like a massive hot air balloon. But what was filling him up wasn't hot air. It was love. He gave Abby a smile to match her own. I love you too, Abby said. Then she glanced at Chica. We should probably go now, Abby added. Mike looked at Chica too. He gave Abby's shoulder a squeeze. Right. He straightened. Mike tucked away the taser gun. He'd used both of its cartridges. It wouldn't be a lot of help now. He pulled out the cattle prod and looked down at Abby. We have to assume the others are also out of whack, he said. Abby nodded. Mike linked his free hand into hers. Okay, he said. Let's get out of here. Mike aimed them out of the room. They started trotting back down the hallway. For the first 20 feet of their flight, Mike thought they had a good chance of getting away, but then he heard a wasp-like buzz pursuing them down the hall. Tensing, Mike quickly looked over his shoulder. What the hell? A small hot pink ball was flying toward them, coming with the speed of an arrow shot from a high-powered compound bow. Mike saw a flash of white in the pink. He realized what he was seeing. Chica's cupcake. And then the pink ball was attached to his injured calf. Mike bellowed in pain, and his leg went out from under him. The momentum of his fall disconnected Mike from Abby. He hit the floor. A solid impact. His landing knocked the cattle prod from his grasp. It skidded across the linoleum. Mike! Abby started to crouch over Mike. Run! Mike shouted. Abby looked down the hall. Her eyes were fraught with terror. She didn't move. Go! Mike urged, whipping his leg back and forth to try and disconnect the cupcake. Hide! Abby finally ran. Mike, now trying to whack at the cupcake with his fist, watched Abby dash across the dining room. Go! He thought when she made a beeline toward the arcade. Abby, her chest heaving, raced past the small stage, heading toward the first row of game machines at the front edge of the arcade. She could hide behind the games, she thought. But Abby was worried about her brother. Slowing her pace just a little, Abby started to turn to look back toward Mike. That's when she felt it. The strong sense that someone was watching her. Abby whipped her head toward the small stage. At first, Abby said nothing. Then she noticed a hint of movement. She quickly looked toward it, and she saw the ghost-like form of a little blue-eyed boy coming out from behind the small stage's curtains. As fast as the boy appeared, he was gone. But Abby spotted something else. Two pinpricks of red light spit into view from the back of the stage. Abby's gaze was caught by more movement. The silver tip of Foxy's hook came into view. Abby ran harder than she ever had in her life. She shot down the first row of game machines and disappeared. She hoped into the back of the arcade. Alright. So we have 23, 24, and 25 left until the epilogue. I'm gonna get me a drink though. Let's see if we can get this done before at least until 2:30. Let's see if we can get this done before then. It'll be tricky, I know, but I think it can be done. Chapter 23. Although Mike could feel chopping teeth against the bandages on his leg, he was pretty sure that the cupcake was getting mostly a mouthful of gauze and padding. It hadn't yet managed to sink its teeth into the meat of his leg. Mike flung his leg against the floor, using this hard surface to scrape the cupcake off him. The cupcake tumbled back. Mike immediately scrabbled toward the cattle prod. When Mike was still a couple feet from the weapon, he stretched out his fingers. He was almost... Mike screamed as a jagged jolt of pain shot up his leg. He looked back. The cupcake had reattached, and this time got a better grip. It had a healthy mouthful of Mike's calf, and it was starting to gnaw its way up Mike's leg like it was an ear of corn. Mike flipped over and started using his right leg to kick the cupcake on his left leg. The cupcake hung on as Mike stomped at it. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, his heel managed to land square in the center of the cupcake's googly-eyed face. The blow wrenched the cupcake free of Mike's leg. Unfortunately, it took a good-sized chunk of Mike's calf with it when it tumbled away. Mike was hit with a wave of nausea, but he ignored it. He also ignored the rush of liquid warmth pouring down his leg. He had to get the cattle prod. Mike surged toward the prod and he grabbed it. He fumbled to find the power switch. A clatter followed by a waspy buzz let Mike know that the cupcake was once again in motion. The buzzing sound grew louder, and Mike knew the thing had launched itself toward the back of his head. Mike spun from his stomach to his back. He brought up the cattle prod. His timing was impeccable. When he pointed the cattle prod to the space above his head, the prod skewered the cupcake right through its buck-toothed mouth. A spark show similar to the one Mike had seen on the stage, but on a smaller scale, blew up right in front of his face. The sparks came from the cupcake's round, wide eyes. Mike flipped the cattle prod, sending the cupcake flying. It hit the floor, rolled, and was still. That was when Mike's mind provided him with a sick vision of what would have happened if he hadn't turned over. The cupcake would have landed on the back of Mike's head. It would have chewed through him, the same way it had gone through the skull of the man Mike had found at the parts and service room. Mike shook off the unwelcome inner movie. He concentrated on getting to his feet. Abby risked a peek around the bright red and gold side of a big arcade machine. Abby didn't know what game it was. She immediately shrank back into her hiding spot. Foxy was standing at the front of the arcade, next to the smashed prize cabinet Abby had darted past less than a minute before. The animatronic, who used to be Abby's friend, was turning his head from side to side. His eyes, which were really, really bright, looked mad. He was trying to find Abby, and not for anything good. Or maybe Abby was wrong. Maybe Foxy was still her friend. Maybe he wasn't mad at her. Maybe he was worried for her. She decided to take another itsy-bitsy look. Abby braced herself against the side of the big game cabinet. She started to lean forward, and her hand slid. Tinny music busted out. The machine's lights fired up. Pins and dings and beeps blipped over Abby. Foxy's head whipped around. He shot his gaze toward the look-at-me machine. Abby's flattened herself against the cold metal of the machine, while it continued to scream, "She's over here!" Abby's finger must have grazed a power button. Dumb, she thought. She should have been more careful. She shouldn't have tried to look again. She squeezed her eyes shut as she heard the stomp, stomp, stomp of Foxy's approaching footsteps. Then she chastised herself for being such a stupid baby. She shot away from the noisy machine and hurtled toward the ball pit. Once there, she quickly and quietly lowered herself into the sea of many-colored plastic balls. Right before she pulled her head under the surface, Abby snuck a look back toward where she'd been hiding. Foxy had reached the still shrilling cabinet. He looked down at it and then looked around it. Abby kept very still beneath the plastic balls. She held her breath as if she were underwater. Mike, limping heavily, reached the center of the dining room. He checked the stage. Freddy and Bonnie were still prone on the stage floor. Mike looked toward the small stage. It was empty. Where was Foxy? "Abby?" Mike called softly. He'd seen her go toward the arcade. He headed that way. Mike was still several feet from the arcade when he heard a voice calling his name. A child's voice. Mike turned, and he felt the blood drain from his face. Standing in the archway that led to the lobby and main corridor was a little boy. A little boy who, with tousled, tousled black hair and bow-like lips. Garrett, Mike whispered. Abby had to start breathing again. She opened her mouth and took a gasp of air. And another, and another. Silent little breaths. The air didn't smell good at all. It smelled dirty and spoiled, like food that was too old. But Abby did her best to ignore the yucky stink. She held herself super duper still. From the clumping footsteps, Abby could tell Foxy was getting close. If they'd been playing the warmer colder game, Foxy was getting warmer. A lot warmer. More clumps. Foxy was hot, hot, hot. Abby was sure that if Foxy looked down, he'd be staring right at where she lay, hidden by the pool of brightly colored balls. She didn't move even the teeniest, tiniest muscle. Mike walked toward his little brother. Garrett didn't move. All Garrett did was stand in the shrouded archway. He stared blankly at Mike. Garrett? Mike said again, louder this time. He's here, Mike, Garrett said. The boy took a step backward, then a second step. Wait! Mike called. Mike hurried forward as fast as his leg would let him. He crossed a few feet between him and Garrett in a little more than a couple seconds. But when Mike was almost to the archway, Garrett melted away. It was as if Garrett became part of the glooming under the archway. He was there, and then he was something else. In Garrett's place, someone in a rabbit costume appeared. Not just someone, a man. Mike could tell this from the rabbit's height and stride, and its grandstanding swank. The rabbit strode toward Mike. Mike put on the brakes and began backing up. He wanted to turn and run, but he couldn't take his eyes off the repellent rabbit. The animatronics were ragged and dirty, but they looked pristine compared to this atrocious costume. The rabbit suit looked like it had gone through an apocalypse. Tattered ears drooped over the cloudy eyes that were surrounded by smudges of black. The rabbit's yellow fur was molted with stains, some of which looked disturbingly like blood. Its fur was torn away in jagged stripes, revealing blackened splotches beneath. But the worst part about the rabbit was that it was striding toward Mike with a filthy toothed smile spreading between broken whiskers that appeared to be pointing toward Mike with very ill intent. Mike immediately went for the second taser gun on Vanessa's utility belt. He aimed. He fired. The charged metal prongs hit their mark. They landed right in the middle of the rabbit's chest. But the rabbit was unfazed. It kept coming. Mike attempted another shot, but he wasn't fast enough. The rabbit quickly closed the distance between them. Without breaking a stride, the yellow rabbit ripped the taser probes from his chest. He reached Mike and swatted the taser from Mike's hand. The taser hit the floor with a crunch and clickety-clack. From the corner of his eye, Mike saw it spin away. Before Mike could regroup, the yellow rabbit gave him a driving shove. The rabbit's strength was almost superhuman. Mike went flying backward. His body hit part of the fort that he and Abby had built with Vanessa and the animatronics, which felt like it had happened in another lifetime. When Mike landed, he was sure he heard it crack a bone. Or maybe it was just a ligament giving way. Whatever it was, it hurt. And that was just the start. As Mike crashed toward the floor above him came tumbling down. A torrent of tables dropped toward Mike like big four-legged dominoes knocking into one another. At the same time, as if by the sheer force of the rabbit's evilness, the room was plunged into near darkness, and a fantastical laser light show began. Abby looked up through the semi-transparent layer of colored balls. Long, thick strips of light, like neon crayons, were cutting through the air over the pit. Abby thought the lights were pretty, and she wished she could see them better, but she didn't move. It was a good thing she didn't, because there's something else up there, too. Abby could see the boxy shape of Foxy's head coming down toward her. Groaning, Mike extricated himself from under the pile of tables. He could feel the continual warm gush of blood flowing down his vein. His calf had been bleeding since the cupcake had taken a bite of him, and he hadn't had time to do anything about it. Now the sub-table's impact had sped up the bleeding. Mike could feel a river of blood come coursing down his vein and saturating his sock. The liquid heat wasn't confined to Mike's leg either. From the sticky wet sensations on his chest and back, he knew his other wounds had reopened too. Mike needed to move, but he couldn't seem to get himself in great. All he could do was belly squirm across the floor. Stopping to catch his breath, Mike looked for the yellow rabbit. He had to squint to see. The constantly moving laser lights distorted everything in the room. Mike had to squint to try to separate phantom shapes from real ones. Thankfully, he didn't see the rabbit. Not thankfully, though, Mike did see movement on the stage. Or he thought he did. He turned his head and inched forward to get a better look. No! Mike thought, when he saw that Freddy and Bonnie were back on their feet. Mike tried to get to his own feet, but he couldn't. His blood loss was worse than he thought, because the floor felt like the deck of a ship at sea. Mike tried again to push off the floor. He began to raise his upper body, and then he stopped. He'd found the yellow rabbit. It was coming his way. Because of the disorienting laser lights, the rabbit looked like it was winking in and out of existence as it approached. It was hard to focus on. That, however, didn't prevent Mike from noticing that the rabbit was pulling out, from where? A huge butcher's knife. Mike looked behind him. Freddy and Bonnie were still advancing toward the front of the stage. As the snail-like pace Mike was moving, it wouldn't take the animatronics long to reach him. Mike turned to front again. The rabbit was closer. Mike looked left and right. A wall on one side, the tables on the other. He was cornered. Abby was barely breathing, which was a good thing. Not only did it keep her quiet, but it kept her from having to inhale the scuzzy scent of the old dusty plastic balls. The cruddy, powdery surface of the balls made her. Uh-oh. Abby crinkled her nose and attempted to hold in the sneeze that tickled her nostrils. But she couldn't. Because she was trying to muffle it, Abby's sneeze came out as a hiss. But it still came out. And it was loud enough for... And it was still loud enough for... Yeah, that's family member. Don't worry about it. Strong hands clamped onto Abby's shoulder. Strong hands clamped on Abby's shoulder. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about that if I remember. Where were we? Oh, yeah. Strong hands clamped on Abby's shoulder. She found herself being hoisted upward. Abby immediately started kicking and screaming. She tried to twist herself free, but Abby was held tight. She came up out of the ball pit and she let out another sneeze. She turned to face Vanessa? Abby stopped fighting and Vanessa pulled Abby the rest of the way out of the pit. She helped Abby get her footing on the floor. Abby brushed herself off as she gasped at Vanessa and at Foxy. Vanessa was holding the cattle prod that Abby had last seen in Mike's hand, and Foxy was on his back, jerking around like he was having a fit. Abby threw her arms around Vanessa's waist. Vanessa used her free hand to return the hug. Abby pulled back. I don't know what's happening to our friends, she said. I don't know why they're trying to hurt us. Vanessa kneeled down in front of Abby. Vanessa's hair was loose, and it was tangled around her face. She looked wild, but when she spoke, her voice was calm. Abby, sweetheart, they're not themselves right now. Abby nodded. She felt like she was going to cry, but she didn't. Vanessa took one of Abby's hands. Listen, Abby, there's someone here who wants to hurt us even very badly. I need to get you somewhere safe, and then I need to go help your brother. I can help too. Vanessa started to shake her head, but then her gaze went to Abby's chest. Abby frowned, looking down to see what Vanessa was looking at. She didn't see anything icky on her overalls, so what was the problem? Abby lifted her gaze to Vanessa's face. Vanessa's eyes were wide, and she had the look that people got when they had an idea. What? Abby asked. The drawings, Vanessa said. Her voice was a half whisper, like she was amazed by something. She looked into Abby's eyes. It's the drawings. Vanessa tucked the cattle prod under her arm and grabbed Vanessa's shoulder. Vanessa tucked the cattle prod under her arm and grabbed Abby's shoulders. You're right, Abby, she said. You can help. Abby made a face. Huh? Vanessa started talking really fast. Your friends, they don't remember. He hurt them badly. He took their families, their love, their lives, but they don't remember. I don't understand. Vanessa let go of Abby's shoulders. She reached out and pulled Abby's drawing pad from her overalls chest pocket. You know what happened to them, Vanessa said, but they don't remember. Vanessa pulled out Abby's pencils and used them to tap on the pad. So tell them. Abby looked from her pad and pencils to Vanessa's face. What? Abby suddenly jumped back to a memory, a really recent one. She remembered seeing the spotlight drawing, the one of the yellow rabbit and the 5 kids. As her mind showed her the drawing again, she saw each of the kids in close-up. She saw the big smiles drawn on their faces. The memory fell away and Abby looked at Vanessa. The picture. Vanessa nodded, smiling. Abby reached out for her pad and pencils. You're right. I have to help them to remember. The yellow rabbit bore down on Mike, waving the butcher's knife in the air like it was a baton, and the rabbit was a depraved orchestral conductor. Mike couldn't stand and run. He couldn't drag himself away at the speed of light. He couldn't sink into this floor or turn invisible. All he could do was look up at the rabbit and say, "Go to heck." The rabbit kicked Mike in the face. Mike's head recoiled and the back of his skull hit the floor. The mother of all headaches kicked in instantaneously. Hot, thick, coppery liquid filled Mike's mouth. It started to run down his throat. He gagged and spit it out. Mike tried to get his eyes to focus, but they didn't want to cooperate. They were somewhere out in a la land of meadows filled with butterflies. That was okay. Mike wasn't going to cower like a wimp. Summoning what strength he still had, Mike turned his head to face the rabbit again. "I said," Mike said as clearly as he could, "go to..." The rabbit kicked Mike again. This time Mike's resolve to be hard failed him. His his head bounced off the floor again, and the meadows and butterflies turned into a confusion of laser lights and crooked teeth and evil eyes and an inky, churning vision of hell. Mike saw this mind-choking landscape through a vapor of gray. Even so, he was able to see the knife raised above his chest. As he fought to stay conscious and began to lose the battle, Mike heard, "That's enough!" Was that Vanessa's voice? It didn't matter. Mike agreed. He'd had enough. He stopped fighting. He closed his eyes and let his consciousness take a break. Tucked behind a battered pinball machine that was missing its glass, Abby sat cross-legged on the floor. She was hidden, but she could still see the dining room. She was bent over her drawing pad, her pencil scribbling as far as she could make it move. As fast as she could make it move. When Vanessa shouted, though, Abby looked up. Abby had to press her lips together to stop a cry from coming out. Her brother was lying totally still on the floor. Blood was all around him. A yellow rabbit, holding a knife, stood above Mike. Vanessa was maybe 20 feet behind the rabbit, but she held a gun in both hands, the way Abby had seen on TV. On TV, though, the cop's hands didn't shake the way Vanessa's hands were shaking. The rabbit's knife stopped in midair, but the rabbit didn't turn around. Vanessa's hands shook even harder. Abby wanted to watch what was happening over by her brother, but the only way she could help Mike was to keep drawing, so she looked back down at her pad. As she did, she thought she saw a movement to her left. Abby glanced that way. Nothing. Where was Foxy? Was he still down? It didn't matter. Abby had to finish her drawing. From the dining room came the sound of a low growl. From the rabbit, Abby thought. She caught her lower lip between her teeth and put her pencil to the page again. "Drop the knife," Vanessa said. Abby started to splitting her attention between the drawing and what was going on with Vanessa and the rabbit. That wasn't a hard thing to do. Abby was used to watching TV while she drew. She knew Mike thought she didn't watch the TV, but she did. Abby drew, and Abby watched as the rabbit, still to Vanessa, began to remove the rabbit costume head. Vanessa's shaking got worse. Abby could see now that the person inside the rabbit suit was a man with gray and dark hair. "A little old for temper tantrums," the man said. Then he turned. "Aren't we, Vanessa?" he said. Abby's pencil faltered. She didn't like the look of the man at all. He had a thin face and a high forehead. He also had very narrow eyes. He looked slimy. "I'm not kidding, Dad," Vanessa said. "Drop it." "Dad?" Abby thought. Poor Vanessa. It's over, Vanessa said. I don't think so, sweets, the man said. You may have forgotten your loyalties, but I assure you they have not. The man gestured toward Freddy and Bonnie, who were at the front edge of the stage. They were standing at attention. Go on, the man said to the animatronics. He pointed at Mike. Rip him into little bitty pieces. Freddy and Bonnie started across the stage, heading to a short flight of stairs. They weren't walking quite right, but they were walking well enough to get to Mike much faster than Abby wanted them to. The man in the rabbit suit looked at Vanessa. Now, why don't you put that silly thing away and help Daddy clean up the mess you made? He took a step toward Vanessa. We both know you won't actually use. The sound of the shot made Abby's pencil skewed across the page in a jagged line. The point of the pencil gouged the paper. Abby ignored both the line and the hole in the paper as she kept drawing. At the same time, she saw the man kind of jump backward. He looked down at his shoulder. Abby could see that Vanessa's bullet had put a hole in the rabbit's suit and the man. The man didn't seem to be bothered by the bullet, but he was angry. Abby could tell. The man snarled at Vanessa and put his rabbit head back on. Then he charged toward her. Abby wasn't as startled by the next 3 times the gun fired. She knew she didn't have much time yet, so she forced herself to keep drawing, even as she watched Vanessa's shots go past the rabbit. Vanessa was shaking too much to aim right, Abby thought, and that was why the man in the rabbit suit was able to reach Vanessa. He grabbed her by the throat. You had one job, the rabbit said. Keep him in the dark, and kill him if he found out too much. Vanessa spit in her dad's face. That's 2 jobs, she said. You tell him, Abby thought, still drawing. Shut up! The yellow rabbit screamed. At the same time, he shoved a big, awful knife into Vanessa's stomach. Abby felt her own stomach get really tight, and she felt like she was going to throw up. But she didn't. She kept drawing. The rabbit dug his fingers tighter around Vanessa's throat and lifted her up. Vanessa's feet flopped in the air several inches above the floor. Abby screwed up her face. Abby was so scared for Vanessa that Abby thought she could feel icky, furry rabbit fingers wrapped around her own neck. But she kept drawing. Vanessa clawed at her dad's chokehold. She tore at her dad's hand, but he didn't let go. As she fought, Vanessa looked toward Mike. Abby shot a glance at her brother, too. Her pencil made one last mark on the pad. Freddy and Bonnie had almost reached Mike. Time to go. Abby got up and ran. Vanessa was again staring into the evil rabbit's eyes. The rabbit, still choking Vanessa with one hand, was totally focused on her. He didn't see Abby at first, but Vanessa did, and she smiled. Abby ran toward the wall of pictures. Her drawing flapped like the bird's wings in her hand. No! The man in the rabbit suit yelled. Uh-oh. He'd seen Abby. Abby flicked a look at the rabbit, but she didn't slow down. Not even when the rabbit let go of Vanessa's neck and turned toward her. Stop! Vanessa shouted. Abby knew Vanessa wasn't talking to her, but Abby's steps faltered when she saw that Vanessa had dropped her hands. Vanessa was gripping the blade of the knife, which was sticking out of her stomach. The rabbit still had one of his hands on the other end of the knife. The rabbit looked down. Grunting, he tried to tug the knife out of Vanessa's belly, but Vanessa wouldn't let go. Abby could see that Vanessa was hurting bad. Vanessa's face was really white and it was all twisted up, but she still managed to say in a gasp, I won't let you hurt her too. Hello, Hans. We'll be able to stay for the full stream. I just want to say great. Oh, no problem. No problem at all. As long as you have a good time for the amount of time that you're here, that's all that really matters. But I appreciate you for stopping by. Chapter 24. Probably should get a drink of tea first, actually. Hold on. Chapter 24 in the penultimate chapter of the book outside of the epilogue. That will be coming up. As much as she hated what was happening to Vanessa and wanted to run at the rabbit and beat him with her fists, Abby knew she couldn't help that way. The only thing she could do was what she was doing. She had to keep going toward the wall. So she didn't let her pace slow, even as she watched Vanessa struggle with her dad. Abby finally reached the wall. She quickly looked over her shoulder, just in time to see Vanessa press toward the rabbit. Vanessa wrapped her dad in a big, hard bear hug. Oh no, Abby thought. She understood that Vanessa was trying to save Abby, but by hugging the man like that, Vanessa had to have driven the knife much farther into her body. Abby started to cry just as the yellow rabbit roared. She watched the rabbit beat at Vanessa's back, trying to get free. Vanessa, however, didn't let go. Abby had to make Vanessa's sacrifice worth it. Turning to the wall of the children's drawings, Abby quickly found the drawing of the yellow rabbit with the 5 kids. She reached for it. Glancing back, Abby saw that Vanessa was looking directly at Abby. Vanessa's eyes looked weird, like they were lights that were having a hard time staying on. Even so, Vanessa held Abby's gaze, and the rabbit continued to fight to get free. Abby got her hand on the drawing of the rabbit and the 5 kids. She crumpled the paper in her grip, and she whipped her head away from the wall. When the drawing let go of the wall, it tore. The sound of the long, crackling, or yeah, you know how sound paper makes when you rip it, was much louder than the normal sound of paper tearing. As soon as the sound ended, Abby saw Vanessa's arms start to drop away from her dad. I'm sorry, Daddy, she said. Her voice was so weak that Abby barely heard it. Get off me! The man in the rabbit suit shrieked. The rabbit flung Vanessa aside, and he turned and looked toward Abby. He let out a booming sound that made Abby think of a really angry dog. That rage, Abby knew, was directed at her, and the rabbit was now coming toward her too. Slap thud, slap thud, slap thud. The sound of the rabbit's footsteps filled the room. He was charging toward Abby. Abby quickly turned and pressed her new drawing to the wall, in the space where the other drawing had been. But the other drawing had been stuck to the wall by tape, and the tape had come away with the drawing. Abby had no way to attach her drawing to the wall. Abby looked at the wall, hoping to find a free piece of tape, but all the tape holding other drawings was old. She knew none of it would work. The rabbit's footsteps were really close. Abby didn't turn to look, but she knew that the rabbit was almost... I know! I know, Abby thought. Abby kept holding the drawing in place with one palm, and with her other hand, she dug into her overalls pocket. She pulled out one of her colored pencils and, swinging her arm in a wide arc through the air, Abby rammed the pencil pointer through the drawing, jamming the pencil into the wall. Abby hadn't been sure it would work because the wall wasn't soft like a bulletin board, but when she let go of the pencil, the drawing stayed in place. Then every light in the dining room went out. Abby hardly dared to breathe, much less move, but she had to see what was happening. Abby turned away from the wall. Even though the dining room lights were dark, the fluorescent lights in the lobby were still on. They were weak, so they couldn't toss brightness very far, but what bit reached the wall of pictures and the rest of the room was enough for Abby to see that no one was moving. The yellow rabbit was just a couple feet from Abby, but he was stopped dead. So were Freddy and Bonnie, who were standing over Mike. Vanessa was on the floor, lying very, very still. Abby wanted to run to Vanessa and Mike, but she stayed where she was. Freddy and Bonnie turned their heads. They looked toward the yellow rabbit. Then they started moving toward the rabbit, their steps slow and unsteady. The yellow rabbit's awful eyes locked on Abby. "What have you done?" he growled. Abby was still scared, but she put her shoulders back and said, "They can see you now." Abby took a step to the side. Suddenly one of the stage spotlights came on. It landed right on Abby's new drawing. Abby looked at her work. Abby looked at her work. Even as panicked as she'd been as she'd drawn, even as worried for her brother and Vanessa, even as grossed out as she was by the yellow rabbit, Abby had done possibly the best drawing she'd ever done in her life. Or it could have just felt that way. Maybe the colors weren't perfect, and maybe some of the things in the drawing were a little shaky looking, but the message of the drawing was perfectly clear. Abby had drawn the yellow rabbit, holding a bloody knife, standing over the dead bodies of 5 little kids. Abby glanced at the yellow rabbit. She couldn't see the man's face behind the costume rabbit head, but she could tell the man didn't like the drawing. The yellow rabbit's grimace looked even meaner than it had before. The yellow rabbit took a step toward Abby. She shrank back toward the wall. A whisper of movement. A thud. Foxy stepped out of the shadows beyond the spotlight. He put himself between Abby and the yellow rabbit. Abby's heart began to pound hard in her chest, but then Foxy turned toward the rabbit. "Move," the rabbit said to Foxy. Foxy didn't budge. "I said move!" the yellow rabbit shouted. A loud click answered the rabbit's bellow. A second spotlight burst on. It caught the yellow rabbit in a circle of white light so powerful that Abby couldn't look directly at it. Neither could the yellow rabbit. He threw up a hand to shield his eyes. The yellow rabbit turned away from the light, and when he did, Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica were there. Almost by magic, Abby thought, but not really. They'd been moving in the darkness when Abby and the rabbit had been distracted by the spotlight. The yellow rabbit was no longer looking at Abby. He was staring at the animatronics. And the animatronics didn't seem to care about Abby either. Now she could move. Abby sidestepped along the wall. No one looked at her. That gave her courage. Keeping her steps as light as possible, Abby hurried over to Mike. She dropped to her knees next to him. "Mike," Abby whispered. "Mike, wake up." The little hairs of Mike's eyelashes rippled against his skin, but he didn't open his eyes. Abby leaned over and put a hand on his shoulder. She shook him really hard. "Mike!" she hissed loudly in his ear. Mike opened his eyes. He blinked several times and then he seemed to zero in on Abby's face. "Abby?" Abby nodded, but tensed when she heard a scrape and a thump. She turned away from Mike. It was okay. She and Mike were okay. The animatronics were closer to the yellow rabbit now. They completely surrounded him, creating a circle that was about 2 feet from him, and they were pressing in even closer. "Look at you," the yellow rabbit said, his voice filled with disgust. He sounded the same way bullies sounded. "Look at what nasty things you've become. Look at how small you are." The animatronics stopped moving. Abby bit her lip. They weren't going to listen to the yellow rabbit, were they? The yellow rabbit took advantage of the animatronics' hesitation. "Wretched, rotten little beasts," he said, his voice even crueler than before. Look at how pathetic you are. The rabbit looked at each animatronic in turn. Look how worthless you are. The yellow rabbit locked in on Chica, who stood before him with her cupcake platter raised. Her cupcake was back in place on the platter, poised but still. The yellow rabbit took a step toward Chica. He pointed at Chica and then pointed toward Mike and Abby. Now get over there, he commanded, and rip them apart before I rip all of you apart. Abby held her breath. What would the animatronics do? Abby got her answer in an instant. The cupcake sprang off its platter. It flew directly at the yellow rabbit's chest, and it sank its big white teeth into the holy fake fur that stretched over the rabbit's heart. The yellow rabbit screamed. He batted at the cupcake, but it hung on. He started twisting around and jumping this way and that, as if he was on fire. He was jerking around so violently that his costume head came off. Abby watched as the yellow rabbit head shot through the air. The head hit the wall of drawings and then bounced to the floor. It rolled over and over twice. Then it lay still. The rabbit ears dropped downward. The toothy mouth gaped open. Abby returned her attention to the man in the rest of the rabbit suit. He had collapsed to the floor. Kneeling, he grabbed the cupcake in both hands. He worked the cupcake back and forth and back and forth. Finally, he ripped the cupcake away from his chest. When the cupcake was plucked loose, it didn't open its mouth. It hung on. So a big white section of sickly yellow rabbit fur went with it. The gap in the rabbit suit made it possible to see the inner workings of the costume. Abby made a face and hugged herself when she saw what was under the fake fur. She'd seen something like it before. It made her insides get all knotted up. The yellow rabbit costume had the same thing in it that the little red-headed girl animatronic had. The one Chica had tried to put Abby into. The suit was lined with row after row of super sharp metal things. Now that Abby could see them more clearly than she had when she was fighting Chica, she decided the metal things looked like a bunch of crab claws. The claws were closed up tight, curled inward toward the sides of the suit. But if the claws opened... As Abby stared at the metal things, she heard a snap, like a lock shooting back. One of the crab claws opened, then another, and another. Abby saw blood starting to run into the metal. Then the blood stained the edges of the surrounding rabbit fur. Abby looked at the face of the man in the suit. His teeth were gritted. His eyes were wide. Abby thought of Vanessa, who was still sprawled on the floor. Vanessa might even be dead. The horrible man in the suit deserved what was happening to him. Abby stopped feeling sorry. She even liked him when she heard another snap and knew that the man was being hurt even worse. Hello, Spark. How you doing tonight? It felt like 100 mini drills were attempting to burrow into Mike's head and into the rest of his body, too. He couldn't see quite right, and his body felt as floppy and useless as a fish snatched out of water. Mike was starting to get his bearings, though. He knew where he was, in Freddy's dining room. He knew Abby was with him, and she was, as far as he could tell, okay. He also knew that the man who had tried to kill him was getting his comeuppance. Mike recognized the snapping sounds he was hearing. He knew what was happening to the man. He was being skewered from inside his costume. Good. What are those things in the suit? Abby asked. They're like the ones in the girl suit. They're, Abby asked. They're like the ones in the girl suit that Chica tried to put me in. Mike felt like a donkey was kicking him in the chest. The idea of Abby. They're spring locks, Mike said. The man in the rabbit suit. It was him. Steve Raglan, the career counselor who had hired Mike, and his voice had been echoing in Mike's skull for so long. Mike didn't know it, but Raglan wasn't his real name. His real name was Forrest. You're fucking up the twist. Mike didn't know it, but Raglan wasn't his real name. His real name was Afton. William Afton. And fate had somehow brought them together once again. Afton looked over at Mike and Abby. Even though the guy was clearly incapacitated, Mike reached for Abby, wanted to protect her. Mike didn't have to worry, though. Afton was just putting on a show of defiance. Afton's face was misshapen by pain, and his body was being jolted savagely by what was happening inside the rabbit suit. Still, through the continuing chain of reaction of spring locks, Afton was able to scoot over the floor. He dragged himself forward until he reached for the costume's head. More snaps. Afton put the yellow rabbit head back on. His motion unsteady and weak, the yellow rabbit managed to right himself. He faced the animatronics, who stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the rabbit. I killed you once, Afton said, his voice strained but strong inside the rabbit head. I can do it again. The yellow rabbit took a step toward the animatronics. Mike heard a series of sharp sounds like a chattering of metal teeth. Clack, clack, clack. The remaining spring locks were disengaging, and even then, Afton, seemingly impervious to destruction, couldn't withstand that. The yellow rabbit's body contorted, hunching inward. Afton howled like a tortured animal. His yowls winged through the building like a flurry of bats wheeling through a subterranean chamber. As if channeling the rabbit's torment, the pizzeria began to agitate. The building felt like it was whipping back and forth on its footings. At the same time, the spotlight began to switch on and off. The laser lights started up. They went out. They started up again. A muddled patchwork of rock sock snippets intertwined with bursts of static coming from the intercom speakers. Sensation overload. Chaos. The building was now rattling within its very core. The remains of Abby's fort were stuttering across the dining room floor. Overhead lights were swinging and one bank of fluorescent lights came crashing down. The light's metal frame landed just a couple feet from Abby. Way too close for comfort. Mike forced his body into gear. They had to move. Come on! Mike shouted. Rejecting his body's weakness, Mike levered himself up from the ground. He had to lean a little on Abby to get himself into motion, but once he took a step, he got some momentum going. He started forward, aiming toward the lobby in a limping run, keeping a tight grip on Abby's hand. But Abby resisted his attempt to urge her forward. Wait! She cried. We have to get Vanessa! Vanessa? She's here? Mike frowned and looked around. Why was Vanessa here? She'd been adamant that... She saved me! Abby shouted. Now she was tugging on Mike. Come on! Mike let Abby lead him, and not toward the lobby, but farther into the middle of the dining room. As soon as they had taken a couple steps, Mike spotted Vanessa. His feet faltered and his breathing hitched. Vanessa was prone on the floor, not moving. A pool of blood that was far too large to make Mike optimistic about her survival extended in all directions around her. She might already be gone, Mike thought. Hindered now by not just his injuries but a choking grief, Mike was barely able to make it the rest of the way to where Vanessa lay. But he got there. When he did, he painstakingly lowered himself to one knee, which he planted in the thick, sticky red spill that surrounded Vanessa. As Mike put two fingers against Vanessa's neck, and to his relief felt a faint pulse, he saw movement on the other side of the room. Even over the continued mishmash of music and static, he heard the clawed, clawed, clawed of animatronic footsteps. His muscles tensed and he lifted his gaze. Mike had been sure the animatronics were coming for him and Abby, but they weren't. They clearly could not have cared less about Mike and his sister. They were otherwise preoccupied. Mike watched as Foxy used his hook to drag the yellow rabbit along behind him. The other three animatronics followed Foxy and the rabbit into the back hallway. Mike! Abby said. She shook his arm. I don't think she's doing good. Mike whipped his gaze back to Vanessa. Abby was right. Vanessa was alive, but barely. Come on, he said. Help me. Neither Mike nor Abby should have been strong enough to lift an unconscious woman, but they did it anyway. They managed to brace her between them as they both got back to their feet. Then each of them hooked one of Vanessa's limp arms around their necks. Holding tight to Vanessa's arms, they managed to start dragging her across the dining room. Mike glanced toward the back hallway as they went, but he saw nothing but a pipeline of black. The animatronics and the yellow rabbit were no longer within view. The discordant chords and snatches of lyrics that still spilled from the speakers were louder now. The lights were playing now. Were playing Now You See Me, Now You Don't even faster than before. The floor began to move under Mike's and Abby's feet. It felt like the building was beginning to sway. Mike heard a tiny zing above his head, and he looked up. He saw the brackets holding two sets of spotlights to the ceiling rend loose. The spotlights came crashing down. They landed just a foot to Mike's right. Without a word, Mike and Abby picked up the pace. They were both running with effort, both panting. Mike's face was hot, and he kept having to blink sweat from his eyes. On the heels of the falling spotlights, whole banks of fluorescent lights began exploding. A glass monsoon poured over the room. Look down, Abby! Mike yelled. He followed his own advice, which kept glass from getting in his eyes. But he felt barb-sized shards poking at his scalp as the glass showered onto his head. Just a few more steps, Mike told himself. He strained to keep hold of Vanessa's arm. Her skin was slick with blood. So were his hands. Mike glanced at Abby, worried that she wouldn't have the strength to keep going. But Abby was a trooper. Her lips were set, and she was frowning ferociously. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. They made it to the lobby, just as a guttural, hellish moan curled up from what felt like the most hidden recesses of the building. The sound reached for them like a killer's hands. Mike tried to look back over his shoulder. He nearly let go of Vanessa when he saw a wraith-like bulkhead of smoke closing in on the lobby. The smoke was coming fast. Too fast. It's going to overtake us, Mike thought. It would... chunk. Mike pulled his gaze from the smoke monster and saw that Abby had released the front door handle. She was leaning into the door, pushing it outward. Mike tried to move forward and he tripped. His head hit the door and he saw black. Chapter 25. Mike had never heard birds sing so loudly. Shielding his eyes against a sun that was playing hide and seek in a cloud-filled sky, Mike looked up at the trees that encircled the clean white lines of the Child Development Center. The massive oaks and pines appeared as if they were standing guard over the building and its precious occupants. The birds Mike could hear were hopping from branch to branch in the trees. Mike realized he'd never really paid a lot of attention to birds in his real life. He'd heard the ones in his dreams every night, but had he ever listened to their songs during the day? Not really. Well, he was going to start now. I'm going to start doing a lot of things, he decided. But right now he needed to pick up his sister. It took Mike a few minutes to get into the building and make it down the long hall to the activity center. He was still limping. Mostly the limp was caused by the human gouge in his calf, but he had a couple hairline cracks in his bones too, in his tibia and fibula. Not big enough for casts, but his doctor had told him. They'd heal on their own. The rest of Mike's injuries were healing too. He needed a lot of stitches, and for a couple weeks he looked like he'd had himself into it splotches of black and blue and purple. But 3 weeks out, the bruises had mostly faded. His stitches were gone. He was on the mend. The sound of laughter hurried Mike along. He looked ahead and saw Dr. Lillian standing in front of the activity center window. They exchanged a wave and Mike was at her side a few seconds later. Mike grinned at Dr. Lillian and looked through the window. Inside the colorful play space, a group of 6 kids were in the midst of a rowdy game of tag and, to Mike's total joy, Abby was one of the kids. His sister, wearing her favorite red overalls, was bobbing and weaving to avoid getting caught. She had some mad moves. Running from animatronics and a serial killer rabbit had honed her escape skills, and thankfully it didn't seem to have dampened her spirit at all. Just the opposite. Right now, as she did an impressive drop and roll that got her out of range of a little boy with a flap top buzz cut, Abby grinned bigger and wider than he'd ever seen. Abby shot to her feet and leaped away from a little red-headed girl. She spotted her brother and gave him a brief wave. Then she was off again, sprinting to the far side of the room. It's really extraordinary, Dr. Lillian said. The turn she's taken these past few weeks. She seems almost happy. Mike turned to look at Dr. Lillian. The doctor tucked a lock of white hair behind her ear as she nodded. Then she glanced down at the lady he favored. One of these days, she said, you'll have to tell me what happened. She pointed at the lane. And how you got that limp. Mike smiled, but he didn't agree to spill the beans. Mike and the doctor watched Abby in silence for a few seconds. Mike and the doctor had watched Abby in silence for a few seconds. Then Dr. Lillian asked casually, and still no word from Jane? Mike shook his head. He'd been ready for this question, and he answered it just as casually as Dr. Lillian had asked it. You know, he said, I think my aunt has finally decided to move on. I mean, she kind of did, Mike thought. So, based on how the book says that, I'm going to assume that Jane might actually have been knocked out when Freddy attacked her. Like, he may have done it to where he wasn't, like, maybe the kid, like, the spirit that inhabited the Freddy animatronic. It may have been that his goal his instructions were not to kill the aunt, but to, at least knock her out and take Abby. Based on what the book is saying, that's my take on it, but I don't know. It may be possible that she was knocked out in the book, but I don't know if they talk about this more in the movie. They probably do, but it has been a year since I last seen it. Because I literally did watch it last October when it came out. So yeah. Mike flipped on his car's turn signal. The creaky click-clack. It's already 2:34, so I'm gonna have to hurry up. The creaky click-click let the creaky click-click led into the sound of his squeaking brakes as he maneuvered the old jalopy around the corner. A belch of exhaust wafted in through Mike's open window. He gave the dashboard in front of him steering wheel a pat. The car's idiosyncrasies had started to amuse him more than annoy him. Mike looked over at Abby, who had her feet pressed against the glove box. Her sketch pad was propped on her knees. She was drawing something Mike couldn't see. It's really not that hard, Mike said. Abby said nothing. I asked you a very simple question, Mike pushed, to which there's a very simple answer. Pizza or spaghetti? You know, between the two of them, that would be a tough choice because I do like spaghetti, but I also do like pizza. So it would be hard for me to pick. Abby, I guess it depends on what I'm in the mood for, you know what I mean? I think that's what it'd be. Abby held up her drawing pad. Mike flipped a look at it. She had drawn a plate of pizza and spaghetti. I told you, I want both, she said. Mike said. I guess we're at an impasse. Abby gave Mike a pretend glare. Then she half grinned and applied a colored pencil to her drawing. She made a sweeping motion with the pencil, and she raised the pad for him to see. Mike glanced over at the pad. Abby had circled the spaghetti. Mike returned his attention to the road. Done, he said. Abby smiled. She flipped the page on her drawing pad. Mind if we make a stop first? Mike asked. Nope, Abby said, concentrating on her new drawing. Mike lowered himself into the high-backed tan vinyl chair that was pulled up next to a safety-railed hospital bed. He breathed shallowly because he hated the sound of the soup of odors in the ICU, bleach and medicines and rubber and urine and hospital food. Why did all hospital food smell like overcooked green beans? The ICU beds were all occupied, so the U-shaped cluster of glass front enclosures was filled in with sounds. Mike could hear the rhythmic pumping of ventilators, the beeping of monitors, and the scrape of equipment being moved, the snuff of soft-soled nursing shoes, and a continual murmur of voices, some soft and some loud. Vanessa's critical care cubicle was on the outside wall of the area, so the sun, still cavorting with puffy white clouds, put a soft hand of warmth against Vanessa's cheek. If only Vanessa could feel it. Or maybe she could. One of the nurses had told Mike that even when patients were in comas, they were sometimes aware of what was going on around them. You can talk to her, the ponytail nurse had told Mike. He leaned forward and looked at Vanessa's pale eyelids. Other than the top of her cheeks, this was all that he could see of Vanessa's face. The rest was obscured by the ventilator that was keeping her alive, while her body recovered from its massive blood loss. Surgeons had repaired her wounds, but her own system had to do the rest. So the big news is, Mike said, I finally got a new job. Not as exciting as the last one, but I'm thinking that's probably a good thing. Mike chuckled briefly, but the sound of his amusement didn't fit with the other noises of the ICU. Mike went silent. He was lying about the job. In truth, he was very excited about his apprentice-level position with a construction firm that was building a big complex at the edge of town. The foreman, who had said he had a past of his own, didn't have a problem with taking a chance on Mike. He even told Mike that he could use company tools and scrap wood to work on his own projects off hours. Mike thought he might make himself some bedroom furniture. Maybe Mike would tell Vanessa about his new job another day. For now, he said, "Look, I know we have a lot to talk about. There are some big things I still need you to explain. But I've made peace with a lot of what happened, and I know that certain decisions you made, well, you weren't in control of them. And I know that when it mattered the most, you were there for me and Abby." Mike thought about Abby's description of all that had happened to Vanessa when he had been out of it. He immediately shut his mind down. He didn't need to linger on that ugliness. "I don't think either one of us would be here today without you," Mike told Vanessa. Mike reached out and took the limp, soft hand that lay on top of a thin, white hospital blanket. At that simple touch, a current of emotion rushed through him. So many feelings. Which was the most dominant? Sadness? Anger? Regret? Caring? Maybe something even more than that? Mike couldn't dissect his own psyche. He was not used to nuances like these. He had been running on such limited settings, grief and regret, for so many years that these new sensations were going to take some getting used to. Mike squeezed Vanessa's hand. "Heal up, Vanessa." His voice cracked on her name. He cleared his throat. "Get strong, and then we'll talk." Mike got up and left the room without glancing back. He tucked all his emotions away for a later time as he navigated the beige-walled hospital corridors to get back to the cheerier yellow-walled lobby. There he found Abby right where he'd left her, in a plush blue chair with an eye shot of a young brunette receptionist who had agreed to keep one eye on Mike's sister while he was gone. Abby was predictably drawing when Mike walked up to her. Mike gave the receptionist a wave of thanks as he looked down at Abby. Abby tucked away her drawing pad and stood. "Did you tell her I said hi?" she asked. "Yeah." Mike gave Abby a quick hug. "Let's go home." Hello, FNAF Jill 43. How you doing tonight? Mike looked out the living room window as he took a seat next to Abby at the kitchen table. The sun, possibly tired from its day of games with the clouds, seemed to be going down faster than usual. It had put on its dusk PJs and it now looked like an orange ball. The bottom of the ball had already dipped behind the hills. Mike looked down at his plate. Another ball, a meatball, was lighting off the top of a mound of spaghetti. It rolled to the edge of the plate and stopped. Mike looked at Abby. She was toying with her fork, turning the handle around and around on her folded napkin. Her gaze was focused on the disappearing sun. "Everything okay?" Mike asked. "I was just thinking about my friends." "You mean Freddy and Chica and the others?" She nodded. "They're all alone, and no one takes care of them anymore." Abby pulled her gaze from the setting sun and looked at Mike. "Can we visit them sometime?" No way in hell, Mike thought. His thought must have been clear on his face because Abby looked down at her food. She sighed. Mike thought about the promise he'd made to her at Freddy's. He was going to do better. He meant it. So if it meant that much to Abby... Mike touched Abby's arm. When she looked up, he made sure his expression was neutral. "You never know what can happen," he said. Abby smiled. She stopped twirling her fork. Mike noticed that the glass next to her napkin was empty. "I forgot the milk," he said, jumping up. Mike stepped to the fridge. He opened its door and grabbed a carton of milk. As he closed the door, his gaze landed on Abby's latest drawing, secured near the door handle by a smiley face magnet. The drawing was of Abby, Mike, Vanessa, and the four animatronics. They were all inside the table fort at Freddy's. Feeling his lip tipped upward in the smallest of smiles, Mike turned away from the drawing. He returned to the table and poured Abby's milk. The milk sloshed into the glass, made a glug glug sound that acted as a catalyst, snatching Mike from the present and plunking him back into his childhood. In his mind, he was watching milk fill a different glass, his own glass. Mike looked up from the glass and he saw his mom set down the milk carton and sit across from him. She smiled at him and lifted both arms to join hands with Garrett and Mike's dad. At the same time, Garrett and Mike's dad took Mike's hands. Joined the family, bowed their heads. Mike blinked and he was back in the present. Mike reached for Abby's hand and she took it. Sharing a brief smile, they bowed their heads and closed their eyes. Abby spoke. Thanks for this food and everything else. Amen. Short and sweet, Mike thought. He squeezed Abby's hand, but he didn't let go of it. Fancifully, Mike wondered briefly what the tiptoe of the setting sun, almost gone now, was seeing as it peeped in through their window. He imagined the scene from the sun's perspective. Brother and sister, holding hands, heads bowed, holding the moment, because it was a perfect one. For this moment, Mike and Abby were happy. Somehow, part of me feels like the multitude of L's is them trying to brag that, oh, this is an L stream. Well, even if that's not what it meant, don't be like that. About the authors. Scott Cawthon is the author of the best-selling video game series Five Nights at Freddy's, and while he is a game designer by trade, he is first and foremost a storyteller at heart. He is a graduate of the Art Institute of Houston and lives in Texas with his family. Seth Kudeback was born in Western Massachusetts. He currently resides in Los Angeles, where he works as a screenwriter. Five Nights at Freddy's is his first feature film. Emma Tammy most recently directed The Left Right Game, a 10-part scripted podcast starring Tessa Thompson, which was acquired by Amazon Studios for series adaptation and is attached to executive produce and direct the pilot of Devil in Ohio for Netflix. Previously, she directed The Wind, which premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and was distributed by IFC Midnight in 2019. The film is currently certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and Emma was recently named one of 25 female filmmakers to watch by IndieWire. Andrea Rains Wagoner is an author, novelist, ghostwriter, essayist, short story writer, screenwriter, copywriter, editor, poet, and a proud member of Kevin Anderson and Associates' team of writers. In a past she prefers not to remember much, she was a claims adjuster, JCPenney's catalog order taker, before computers, appellate court clerk, legal writing instructor, and lawyer. Writing in genres that vary from her chick lit novel Alternate Beauty to her dog how-to book, Dog Parenting, to her self-help book, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, to ghostwritten memoirs, ghostwritten YA, horror, mystery, and mainstream fiction projects, Andrea still manages to find time to watch the rain and obsess over her dog and her knitting, art, and music projects. She lives with her husband and said dog on the Washington coast, and if she isn't at home creating something, she can be found walking on the beach. Epilogue. The blond boy moved through Freddy's like he was giving a tour to nobody. Caught in the shadow upon shadow, the room hunkered within the protective walls of the old restaurant. The empty lobby, posters still bare of glass. The long hallway with more glassless posters. The security office, its monitors lit up but no one watching them. The kitchen, all shiny and stuff. The parts and service room, a mew of robot parts, and empty metal chairs. And of course the dining room, where the animatronics stood rigid on the barely lit stage. Everything was totally quiet. The blond boy went on down the back hallway. All the doors along the hall were closed, except for one, at the very end. The blond boy went through the door into a small, hardly more than closet-sized room. He looked at where a light from the hallway landed on the room's bare, dusty, checkerboard floor, and beyond that to the yellow rabbit slumped in a corner. The rabbit was reclined against the mildewed center cement block wall. Not a rabbit. A man. A man in a horrible costume. A twitching man, slouched in a massive spread of blood. It was rust-colored, dried blood that was stuck to the floor. Maybe forever. The boy watched the man from the doorway, taking satisfaction in the man's suffering. The boy wanted his suffering to go on as long as the stain on the floor. Maybe longer. The boy backed out of the room. He closed the door, sealing the yellow rabbit into a black, black prison. There's more Five Nights at Freddy's to explore. Showing off all the books here. They got Five Nights at Freddy's, The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, The Fourth Closet, Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Frights number 1 through 6. Going more 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all the way up to 11. Five Nights at Freddy's Tales of the Pizzaplex books, up to number 8. Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, the graphic novel, The Twisted Ones graphic novel, The Fourth Closet graphic novel, Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Frights graphic novel collection volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4, Five Nights at Freddy's fictional character encyclopedia, Five Nights at Freddy's cookbook, The Ultimate Guide of Five Nights at Freddy's, the official Five Nights at Freddy's coloring book, and of How to Draw Five Nights at Freddy's. But yes, that is officially the end of the Five Nights at Freddy's book. Now, as a book in itself, this would probably be entertaining, maybe to even those outside of the Five Nights at Freddy's circle. To me personally, I enjoyed reading this book. I probably might have enjoyed reading this book more than I did watching the movie, but still, this book, for the most part, seems to have kept everything in the movie in the book, because obviously, but I also feel like there are some parts to the book that are not in the movie, but we'll find out. We'll see about that when when I'm able to watch the movie. But in any case, I don't need to give it a rating because it actually kind of did already with that teen rating on the bottom there. So it's gonna be PG-13, but I'm pretty sure I know how to what to give it for that PG-13 rating as to why it's gonna be PG-13. But in any case, that this is a good book. I very much enjoyed it. If I had to say, yeah, if I would definitely recommend this book to any Five Nights at Freddy's fan that loves to read books, or if you're just a Five Nights at Freddy's fan, I would suggest picking this up. It's a good book, I would say. But yeah, if you also like horror, maybe it might be your cup of tea. Give it a bit of a glimpse, and you might like it, maybe. But either way, that's the end of the book, and that's the end of the stream. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for watching this live stream. Hope you guys enjoyed the final episode of the Five Nights at Freddy's book reading. And at some point soon, probably on my next day off, whenever that may be, I will probably go live with watching the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, as well as watching whatever horror movie I have for that night as well. But we'll see. But we'll see what happens. Either way, but for now, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole signing off.